Does daycare produce healthy, well-adjusted children who are capable of civil discourse in society? Or does it create children with an anxious or an avoidant attachment to self because they don't get the one-on-one attention they need from their mother? Well, I'm going to argue the latter. And today we're going to hear from Erica Commissar. She's a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in maternal fetal bonding. So let's start with a clip from her, and then we're going to hear from Dr. Gabor Mate, who specializes in how childhood trauma impacts adults. He practices family medicine. Let's start with Erica, though, because she has this great clip that I want to share.
You're not a fan of daycare, are you?
No.
What's wrong with daycare?
Daycare raises salivary cortisol levels in children, the studies show, meaning those babies are put into stressful states at a very young age when their brains are developing. Daycare has been known to increase aggression and anxiety and behavioral problems in the school years. And those children are more likely to develop attachment disorders. Remember, those first 3 years when children are so very fragile and vulnerable, taking them away from your body as a primary attachment figure and handing them over to strangers and leaving them there for hours on end will cause your child to have to develop pathological defenses. And that's what those children are forced to do.
You're not a fan.
I can speak from experience. My children definitely develop pathological defenses, and in large part because I put them in daycare. I'm Carrie Blazer, the Divine Feminine. My soul's name is Sophia. And I'm really here to share my free ebook below that teaches my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies so we can all love ourselves more and bring out the best out of ourselves, bring out the best out of women, healthy feminine women who feel empowered and encouraged and have the self-confidence to say, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I always wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, and I always knew that my femininity came out so much more when I wasn't working. But I was born in 1970. My parents got a divorce in 1976. I had my first job when I was 12 years old, even though I lived in an affluent town and my dad was making 6 figures. I started a 6-year career at Hot Dog on a Stick when I was 14, bought my own car, went to college, got a master's degree, and worked all the time my kids were young. And they all developed attachment disorders, anxious or avoidant. My son has mild autism. My youngest daughter has an eating disorder. They all have ADHD. This is because they were not raised in a healthy environment at home. I did not have a secure attachment to myself. I had an anxious attachment style, so I attracted in a man with an avoidant attachment style. And there we go. Narcissist, empath, avoidant, anxious, however you want to call it, there was the dysfunctional dynamic that my children were raised within. And they've all been on SSRIs. They've all had suicidal thoughts. Both my youngest and my oldest have been institutionalized in either in a inpatient mental health care or also rehab. That's how challenging my children's life were. And I'm the divine feminine, but I was figuring out my own crap, right? I had a lot of crap to figure it out. And that's when I figured out all my own crap and all the wisdom that I developed along the way. There's my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies, my free ebook that I also have a book, My Inner Heroine, Exploring Feminine Pain. But let's get into Dr. Gabor Mate, who can explain the connection between attachment and authenticity. And then we're going to get into a deeper dive with another one of his videos that shows us, what happens to adults who are raised in an environment where they cannot develop a healthy attachment style while also simultaneously expressing themselves authentically to proceed through the healthy individuation process. Okay, let's get to Dr. Gabor Mate because he's excellent on this front. Here we go.
What happens to a child where the attachment need is not compatible with the need for authenticity? In other words, if I'm authentic, my parents will reject me. If I feel what I feel and express what I feel, and insist on my own truth, my parents can't handle it. And parents convey those messages unconsciously all the time. Not because they mean to, not because they don't love the child, not because they're not trying to do their best, but because they themselves are suppressed or traumatized or hurt or stressed. And what does the child do with that? Well, if I give up my attachment for the sake of authenticity, I lose my relationships on which my life depends. Therefore, there's no question. What becomes suppressed is our authenticity, our emotions. And then we become 25 and 30 or 35, 40, and we don't know who we are. What happens to a child
So
where
let's look at another video that Dr. Amate has on what happens in those scenarios where children are forced to choose between the attachment and their authentic self. I mean, that was me. My whole life, I felt like I had a whole hole in my heart, just completely rejected myself, didn't know how to have relationships, spent a lot of time alone, didn't know how to apologize, forgive, the gamut of a healthy relationship. My mom was an alcoholic. My dad was a workaholic. And so I became a workaholic. I'm allergic to alcohol. I get hives, but I use edibles to help me. But yeah, I don't say I didn't spend time in daycare, but I spent a lot of time alone at home. But seeing my kids in daycare, and what I know about daycare now is, children need that constant mirroring to become emotionally mature. But when their mirroring happens from other toddlers or other young kids, and they don't have enough time with the mother, then we develop kids who are not becoming emotionally mature because they're mirroring other kids and not mirroring the adults. Children are designed to mirror the adults, not other kids. So when a child is raised in a healthy family with a healthy attachment style, they naturally can have healthy social interactions because it just comes out of their heart. The love, the compassion naturally comes out of their heart. So this whole idea that kids need to socialize, no, that came out of the Industrial Revolution when we forced women into the workforce and then kids went to daycare, and that's how we separated, parents and kids, and women were taught to let kids cry it out. I mean, I was taught to let my children cry it out, and my son has mild autism, we know that an overabundance of cortisol in the mother's system, which he definitely had when I was pregnant, is a major contributor to autism. And then letting the kid cry it out, he's crying as an infant, and I won't go to him. I mean, I always felt like the other room was too far away, but all society told me that I was wrong. I was told to listen to society and not my internal guidance. Well, now I know I listen to her internal guidance, and and that's the ticket. So let's get back to Dr. Gabor Mate and see what he can teach us about the downstream impacts when children are not able to attach in a healthy way and express themselves authentically in a healthy way, and the damage that does to the body and the soul. Let's get back to Dr. Mate and see what else he can teach us about addiction. How it leads to addiction is really what this video is. And that I know is scary.
So an addiction is a complex psychological, physiological process, but which manifests in any behavior that a person enjoys, finds relief in, and therefore craves in the short term, but suffers negative consequences in the long term and doesn't give up despite the negative consequences. So craving pleasure, relief in the short term, negative consequences in the long term, inability to give it up. Now, notice I have said nothing about substances. I said any behavior. So it could be related to cocaine, crystal meth, heroin, fentanyl, marijuana, nicotine, alcohol, whatever. Could also be sex, gambling, internet, relationships, shopping, eating, work, extreme sports, working out, pornography, any number of human activities. So I said any behavior. Now, the official definition of addiction, according to the American Society for Addiction Medicine, is that this is it's a primary brain disorder. It arises in the brain, largely due to genetic reasons. This is how they see it. And I say that's just not true. The other popular idea of addiction is that it's a choice that somebody makes, that people choose to be addicted, which is what the legal system is based on. Because if people are not choosing, what are we punishing them for? And although I think the medical definition is closer to the truth, I don't see it as it's a genetic disorder, and I don't see it as a primary brain disorder. So let me perhaps show you why, if that's okay. A human being has two fundamental needs, apart from the physical needs, in infancy, in childhood. One is for attachment. Now, attachment is the closeness and proximity with another human being for the sake of being looked after, or for the sake of looking after the other. Now, human beings, as mammals, and even birds, are creatures of attachment. We have to connect and attach because otherwise we don't survive. If there's nobody that's motivated to take care of us, to attach to us that way, and if not motivated to attach to others, we just can't survive. One interesting thing is that the endorphins, which are the body's internal opiate chemicals, which heroin and all the other opiates resemble, they help to facilitate attachment. So if you take infant mice and you knock out their endorphin receptors so they don't have endorphin opiate activity in their brain, they won't cry for help and separate from their mothers, which would mean that they would die in the wild. And which goes back to what happens in childhood when there's stress and trauma, these endorphin systems don't develop. And then when people do heroin, it feels like a warm, soft hug to them. They feel love and connection for the first time.
Komisar say as well, when children are stressed in childhood, like she talked about earlier, that's why daycare is bad. There's too much stress. The child's nervous system before 3 isn't designed for it. The amygdala, which handles stress, is not designed to turn on before 3. But when we put them in stressful environments like separating from the mother, it overactivates, and then the neurological development of the child is impeded. These systems don't develop because the system is flooded with cortisol as opposed to endorphins. And you can do a deeper dive into it, but this is what this is the cost of putting money and convenience like daycare before health and well-being. Well, I have a kid, throw him in daycare, but I can have a kid. And I'm going to ask the question, do adults have a right to children, or do children have a right to adults? Like, do adults have a right to have children no matter what, or do children have a right to a healthy home environment with healthy biological parents? And which way creates a healthy society? I'll leave you to think about that.
That's why it's so powerful. But so we have this need for attachment, without which obviously the human infant, who is the most helpless, the most dependent, the least mature of any creature in the universe at birth, cannot survive without the attachment. And that attachment relationship, given that we have the longest period of development of any creature, well into adolescence and beyond, attachment is not a negotiable need. But we have another need, which is authenticity. Now, authenticity, out of the self, means being connected to ourselves, just knowing what we feel and being able to act on it.
So I'm going to quote Carl Jung here.
That means our gut feelings.
About loneliness. One does not feel lonely because one has no one about them. One feels lonely because one is unable to express what's important to them, authenticity. When we cannot express ourselves authentically, and we're not raised in an environment that supports that and models how to do that, and there's the repression of the self, there's the addictions. There's the external locus of control, because we don't have inner control. Weren't modeled how to be authentic and express ourselves in a healthy way, which is suppressed, like in my family. And there the addictions come out.
So let's look at how human beings evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, and for 100,000 years or so of this species existing on Earth, how did we live? We didn't live in cities and houses and so on. We lived out there in the wild until very recently in human existence. Now, just how long do you survive in the wild if you're not connected to your gut feelings? Not very long. If you start using your intellect instead of your gut feelings, you just don't survive. So that's a powerful survival need as well. So attachment is a survival need, authenticity is a survival need. But what happens if your authenticity threatens your attachment relationships? For example, as a 2-year-old, you get angry because you didn't get that cookie before dinner. But your parents can't handle anger because they grew up in homes when there was rageaholism and they're terrified at the very expression of anger. So they give you the message that good little kids don't get angry. The message you receive is not that good little kids don't get angry, but that angry little kids don't get loved. Because your parents are now sullen, they won't look at you, they talk to you in a harsh way, you're not getting loved. Not experiencing love at that moment. No, but you got to stay attached. Guess what you're going to suppress? The authenticity every time. And this is how we lose connection to ourselves and to our gut feelings. So that, strangely enough, that very dynamic, which is essential for human survival in a natural setting, not becomes a threat to our survival in this more modern
Here's an
setting,
example.
where to stay authentic
Between
is to threaten
bears
attachment.
and humans. And you can look it up on YouTube. There's tons of evidence of this. Florida, bears and trees, okay? A day before a Category 5 hurricane arrives, the bears go up the trees. I saw one video where there are 5 bears in one tree. And they survive. And here we have the humans, on the ocean's edge in our homes saying, bring it. That's mind over gut feelings. That's, putting I've decided I'm better as a human. God gave us dominion over animals and land, which is Christianity, as opposed to trust my inner guidance. The cross is the only ladder to heaven, as if heaven is external to us. But we live in a holographic universe, meaning the universe is a mirror showing us ourselves at all points.
And so we give up our authenticity, and then we wonder who the hell we are, and whose life is this, and who's experiencing all this, and this life doesn't, and who am I really? So that's where the reconnection has to happen. That's where the healing has to happen. That's what the healing happens, is with that reconnection. But it's because of that conflict, the tragic conflict
I'll
in
link it
childhood between
below, but that's the
authenticity and attachment
reparenting
that most of us
process.
face.
It's the process of recalibrating your nervous system to experience love, compassion, and enlightenment instead of fear, guilt, and shame. And that's what my free ebook below will teach you how to do. The lesson 1 is called Appreciate, Learn, Forgive equals ego death. Because appreciate, learn, forgive is the process I went through to learn how to process my emotions. First, I'm grateful that I have a challenge. I'm grateful that I have emotional pain to learn from, that I have emotional pain to turn into wisdom. That's the gift. There's even a quote in spiritual circles that even the box of darkness he left me with was a gift. What's the gift? The process of learning how to turn my darkness into wisdom, learning how to operate my soul. So first you appreciate your challenges, then you learn your lessons through self-reflection. Why was it necessary for me personally to attempt suicide? Why was all that necessary? Why was it necessary for me to have a failed marriage? Why was it necessary for me to have times where I don't speak to my kids? Why was it necessary for me to lose so many jobs? Why was it necessary for me not to be successful at school? Why were so many things necessary in my life? And then when I asked why was it necessary, that's basically giving credit to my soul for planning my life for me. And I'm going to quote Einstein: the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. The energy field controls the particle. The particle doesn't control the energy field. So when we look outside of ourselves for answers, right? When we shut down our gut feelings and let, God gave us dominion over, animals and land. What happened then? Well, then we had manifest destiny. We killed 60 million buffalo. We killed, a few 100 million beavers, the wolves, the otters, the salmon. We killed all the keystone species and wondered why we have ecological problems. Well, they create ecological resilience. They stop flood, drought, wildfires. They stabilize the ground, just to begin with. But we killed them because of our worldview, of what we learned, what we internalized, what we were controlled by. And so let's learn how this really operates here. We live in a holographic universe. How does that operate, right? So, as Einstein said, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. The field controls the particle, not the particle controls the field. And I'm going to bring up Dr. Bruce Lipton now, who is like the godfather of the field of epigenetics, epi meaning before genetics. So what happens before genetics? Again, the field is the sole governing agency of the particle. So we know if I think about hamburgers, my mouth salivates. Whether hamburgers are present or not, the field controls the particle. If I, fantasize about a guy and he's not here and I get sexually turned on, that's the field controlling the particle. That's how it works. Now let's watch his epigenetics before I do a deeper dive into how the heart is a physical vortex and how all that operates and how we can all learn how to recalibrate our nervous systems for love, compassion, and enlightenment instead of fear, guilt, and shame. And why, when we're programmed for fear, guilt, and shame, that brings about physical illness. We'll get into that in a second. All right, power epigenetics. Here we go.
Whatever picture you hold in your mind, the brain releases complementary chemistry that matches that picture, and it releases it into the body. And the chemistry of the blood is what controls the genes and the behavior. Children, when adopted into a family where there's cancer running in that family, the adopted child will get the same family cancer. But the point, the adopted child has totally different genetics. What was the point? It was being adopted into a family where the programming of that child is what caused the cancer. It's consciousness who releases the chemistry to the environment that controls the genes. And you can change your consciousness, and you can change your environment. And all of a sudden I said, oh my God, we were programmed to be victims. It turns out we are masters of our genetic activity. And this is the new science called epigenetics.
Right, there's a science called epigenetics showing us how the field is the sole governing agency of the particle, the energy field. In a moment, I'm going to bring up a video about how the heart is a physical vortex. And we're going to lean on a famous quote from Tesla. If you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. And after that video, we'll get into how the heart is formed in a fetus. So we can see that blood flows before the heart is even formed. So how can the heart be an actual pump? Interesting questions. But let me get over some basics before we get into these videos. So our souls communicate out through our hearts, a heart and soul. And the nervous system in our hearts is far more complex than our brains. And our hearts send about 90% more signals to our brains than the other way around. So if in our soul there's fear, then the fear goes into the heart, communicates to the brain releases cortisol. Then when we have an overabundance of cortisol in our systems, we crave sugar, because cortisol keeps the sugar levels in our blood really high, preparation for fight or flight. But staying in that state, which I was in for the majority of my life due to my childhood trauma, I didn't know how to change my energy field, change my soul, turn my wounds into wisdom. I crave sugar, and I had a sugar addiction. One of my many sugar addictions, a little bit of a shopping addiction, alone addiction. I couldn't be around people. I couldn't have relationships. So what my soul is communicating is what my body receives. And if my body is receiving an overabundance of cortisol and inflammation due to the cortisol and the sugar, then that drives disease. That's why the field is a sole governing agency of the particle, why they study what comes before the genetics, because they have to study what turns on the genetics. And epigenetics has proven that less than 1% of our diseases comes from our genetics. It comes from the field. So how do you change your field? All right, well, that's where my 6 divine feminine self-love strategies will help you turn your wounds into wisdom. This is why changing the field is so important. So when what's coming out of your field is primarily love, compassion, and enlightenment, your brain is not overproducing cortisol because your energy field is not asking it to. And you're the only one that has sovereignty over your own soul. We live in a holographic universe. It's not outside in, it's inside out. Believing that Jesus will forgive me for my sins doesn't help me forgive myself for my, quote, sins, my wounds. So it doesn't matter what their soul is doing. If I don't internalize it and do the work on my own, that doesn't help me. Hence why you have so many Christians who have no idea how to love thy enemy, evidenced by manifest destiny, the Spanish Inquisition, burning women at the stake. Millions of people and animals were killed, and we destroyed our ecology, all because God said. I leave you to question that. Let me bring up the video about how the heart is a vortex. And yes, I'm the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene, so I address these topics too. Here we go.
Let me just read this because I think it's actually probably one of the best descriptions of the heart that I've ever run across. They taught you the heart was just a glorified meat pump, that it squeezes and pushes blood like some crude mechanical device, a hydraulic engine made of flesh. That is what they want you to believe, because if you buy into that primitive lie, you never ask deeper questions. But it is false. It has always been false, and the real science proves it. Dr. Francesco Torrenguas, a Spanish cardiac researcher, discovered what the textbooks refuse to acknowledge, that the heart is not a pump. He dissected thousands of hearts and found that the heart is a single continuous muscle band folded into a spiral. He proved that the heart works like a vortex generator, creating suction and torque, not pressure. He called it the helical ventricular myocardial band, and it changes everything. The real movement of the blood comes from pressure differentials, electromagnetic flow, and coherent resonance. The blood spirals naturally. It need not be forced through miles of arteries and capillaries. The so-called pump is not strong enough to push thick fluid through 60,000 miles of tubing. That is basic physics. That lie was dead on arrival. Here is the truth. Blood moves before the heart forms in the embryo. That is, by the way, a documented fact. It flows via frequency, resonance, and electric charge. The body is a field, not a factory. Your heart creates a toroidal electromagnetic field that radiates 6 meters from the body. This field syncs with the earth, the sun, and every living being around you. It is a resonator, a tuner, a conductor. It aligns the rhythm of your cells. It feels, it remembers, it emits, and it responds to emotion, thought, light, sound, and breath. When you feel love, grief, fear, or peace, your heart transmits it. It is the central frequency modulator of your biology, not a pump. And the institutions know this. The Heart Math Institute has measured these fields for decades. They know the heart has more neuronal cells than parts of the brain. They know it is a second brain. They know coherence in the heart transforms the entire nervous system. So why are they still teaching children a 400-year-old guess from William Harvey that has never been updated?
That's an excellent question. Why are we not teaching this type of inner guidance? That it's our inner world controlling our outer world instead of our outer world controlling our inner world. Does that have anything to do with the rise of a nation state and the need for external control? Yeah, I'll leave you with that. But I'm going to bring up this next video with that shows how hearts are formed in an embryo. It's just beautiful. Well, here we go. Before the heart beats for the first time, something far greater begins to move. Long before your heart ever beat, thousands of cardiac cells made a silent decision. There was no pulse, no rhythm, no sound. In the earliest stages of development, individual heart cells begin firing, electrical signals on their own. Then something remarkable happens. They synchronize. Separate impulses align into one coordinated electrical wave. Energy naturally aligns with the highest vibrating energy. That's why enlightenment is the highest vibrating emotion, and people naturally align with enlightenment. That's the same reason. So Separate impulses align into one coordinated electrical wave. That wave triggers the first contraction, the first heartbeat, the beginning of a rhythm that can last a lifetime. So I will leave you with that and a lot to think about child rearing kids and how we heal from childhood trauma. When you have heart coherence, that's what communicates coherence to the rest of the nervous system, then the nervous system will align. But I'll leave you with one tip. When you're engaging in processing your emotions, engage your action and communication at the same time, like journaling or like chopping wood for men, and then also articulating your emotional pain. Engage the masculine and the feminine. That's what brings coherence. That's what brings wholeness. And that's what I'm here to help you do. All right. Take care. Please like and subscribe. Bye.